On a cool March morning, the California sun climbed over the Hollywood Hills. It was a Friday, March 5th, 1982. The light was clean, sharp. It promised another perfect day in the land of perfect days. Below, the city was waking up, a low hum of traffic on Sunset Boulevard, the rustle of palm trees in a gentle breeze. But high on the hill, tucked away at number 8221, a fortress stood silent, the Chateau Marmont. And inside the Chateau Marmont, in a secluded cottage behind the main building, a deeper silence reigned. Bungalow 3. The air inside was thick, stale, a chemical cocktail of old cigarette smoke, stale beer, and something else, something acrid and sweet, the ghost of cocaine. The living room was a wreck, a testament to a week-long storm. A guitar case lay open on the floor, strings facing the ceiling. An acoustic guitar leaned against a chair, forgotten. Takeout containers from Mel's Drive-In were stacked on a table, a fossil record of past cravings. Ashtrays overflowed. Beer bottles stood empty. A crumpled script for a movie called Noble Rot sat on the edge of a sofa, its pages dog-eared and stained. The television was off. The stereo was quiet. In the bedroom, the stillness was absolute. The blinds were drawn, but thin blades of morning light cut through the gloom. They striped the rumpled bed sheets. They illuminated dust motes dancing in the dead air. A man was on the bed. He was lying on his side, his back to the door. His body was curled into a fetal position, knees pulled toward his chest. One arm was draped over the side of the bed, fingers nearly touching the floor. He was naked from the waist up. This was John Belushi. Outside, another man was walking toward the bungalow. His name was Bill Wallace. He was Belushi's physical trainer, his bodyguard, his friend. His job was to keep the chaos at bay, a job he was failing. He knocked on the door of Bungalow 3. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. "John, it's me, Bill. Wake up." Only silence answered. A cold knot of dread tightened in Wallace's stomach. He had seen this before, the silences, the locked doors, the aftermath of the storm. He used his own key. The lock clicked. The sound was unnervingly loud. He pushed the door open and stepped into the living room. The smell hit him first. The smell of decay, of a party that had died hours ago. He saw the mess, the usual mess. He called out again. "John?" He walked toward the bedroom. The door was ajar. He pushed it open, and he saw him, just a shape under the sheets in the dim light. Wallace moved closer. He reached out and touched Belushi's back. The skin was cold, not cool, cold. A waxy, unnatural cold. He shook him, gently at first, then with rising panic. "John! Hey, John!" The body was heavy, inert, a dead weight. Wallace pulled back the sheet. He saw Belushi's face. His skin was bluish. His lips were dark. A small trickle of something had dried at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were closed. Wallace knew. In that instant, he knew. He felt for a pulse in the neck. Nothing. He pressed his ear to the chest. No sound, no breath, no heartbeat. The storm was over. The man who had filled Saturday nights with explosive, anarchic laughter was gone. The force of nature had been extinguished. In this quiet, private bungalow, shielded by the discreet walls of Hollywood's most famous sanctuary, a tragedy had reached its inevitable conclusion. The Chateau Marmont had claimed another soul. But how did this place, a palace of dreams built on a Hollywood hill, become the final, sordid stage for such a public self-destruction? To understand the darkness that fell in Bungalow 3, we must first understand the light that built the castle. We must go back. Back before the scandal, before the rock stars and the overdoses. Back to the very beginning. Before the Chateau Marmont, there was just the hill. It was a steep, sun-drenched slope covered in chaparral and scrub oak. Part of a sprawling Spanish land grant called Rancho La Brea. For centuries, it was quiet, the domain of coyotes and hawks. Below, a dusty track cut through citrus groves and bean fields, a path that would one day be paved, widened, and electrified with neon, a path that would be called Sunset Boulevard. In the early 20th century, Hollywood was a whisper, a sleepy conservative town that had banned movie theaters and saloons, but a new industry was arriving, loud, disruptive, and full of ambition, the movie business. It spilled out of New York and New Jersey, chasing the perpetual sunlight of Southern California. Studios sprouted like weeds in the flatlands. And with the studios came the people, the actors, the directors, the writers, the producers. A new aristocracy of make-believe. They needed places to live. The hill above Sunset became a prime location. It offered views. It offered prestige. It offered a slight remove from the common chaos of the city below. An enterprising developer saw the potential. His name was Fred Horowitz. Horowitz was not a movie man. He was a prominent Los Angeles attorney, a man of sober calculation and grand vision. He saw the influx of transient, high-earning talent from the East Coast, people who needed sophisticated temporary housing. Not just a hotel room, but a home. An elegant, fully serviced apartment building. His vision was specific. It was European. It was grand. He had traveled through the Loire Valley in France. He had seen the chateaux, the castles, the ancient homes of French nobility. He was particularly inspired by the Château d'Amboise, a royal residence, a fortress, a symbol of enduring power and grace. That was what he would build. A castle for the new kings and queens of Hollywood. It would not be a mere building. It would be a statement, a landmark. He hired his brother-in-law Arnold A. Weitzman as the architect. Weitzman was a talented designer, but this project was on another scale entirely. Horowitz drove the vision. He wanted something that looked like it had stood for centuries, something solid, something real in a town built on illusion. He chose the site carefully. A commanding plot of land at 8,221 Sunset Boulevard, perched on a promontory with panoramic views of the city. He acquired the land. Thousands of acres were not needed, just this perfect, elevated stage. Construction began in 1927. This was not a simple task. Building a 7-story L-shaped castle on a steep hillside was an engineering nightmare. But Horowitz insisted on the best, the most durable. He wanted it to be earthquake-proof, a fortress against the tremors that periodically shook Southern California. The foundation was sunk deep into the bedrock of the hill. The structure was reinforced concrete and steel, designed to move with the earth, not fight it. A legend grew that Horowitz instructed his contractors to mix concrete with the milk from a local dairy, believing it would make the structure stronger. An absurd, apocryphal tale, but one that spoke to the obsessive nature of its creator. The logistics were immense. Materials were sourced from all over. Tiles for the roof, hardwoods for the floors, marble for the lobbies. An army of laborers swarmed the hill, masons, carpenters, electricians, plumbers. They were building a palace from scratch. The design was a fantasy of Gothic and Romanesque styles. A fairy tale castle imported to the California coast. It had turrets, spires, and steep gabled roofs. It had private balconies and large arched windows. Inside, it was designed for modern luxury. The building was divided into 60 private apartments, each with a unique layout. Some were small studios, others were sprawling, multi-bedroom penthouses with private terraces. Every unit had a full kitchen, formal dining rooms, and state-of-the-art amenities, central heating, soundproofing. The lobby was a cathedral of quiet elegance. Fluted columns, vaulted ceilings, and heavy, dark wood furniture. A massive pipe organ was installed, though rarely played. The Chateau Marmont was completed in 1929. It was magnificent. A monolith of white concrete and old-world charm gleaming in the California sun. Horowitz had realized his vision. He had built his castle. But his timing could not have been worse. Weeks after the grand opening, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began. The dream of filling his luxury apartments with high-paying tenants evaporated. The new Hollywood royalty was suddenly cautious. The chateau was a beautiful, empty palace. The operating costs were ruinous. Horowitz, the shrewd lawyer, was facing financial disaster. He had built a machine that eats resources, and the resources were gone. In 1931, facing bankruptcy, he sold the property for a fraction of its cost. He sold it to Albert E. Smith, a motion picture pioneer who co-founded Vitagraph Studios. Smith had a different idea, a more practical one. If the chateau couldn't work as an apartment building, it would become a hotel. The transformation saved it. As a hotel, the Chateau Marmont found its true calling. It became the ultimate Hollywood sanctuary. Its thick, soundproofed walls were not just for comfort, they were for discretion. Its labyrinthine corridors and multiple entrances allowed for comings and goings to go unnoticed. The staff learned a cardinal rule: see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. The chateau became a place where stars could be themselves, away from the prying eyes of the press and the moral clauses in their studio contracts. The golden age of the chateau began. Jean Harlow, the original blonde bombshell, moved in with her third husband. She conducted a very public, very scandalous affair with Clark Gable within its walls. Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire, rented a penthouse. He used binoculars to spy on starlets at the pool below. Greta Garbo, seeking solitude, would check in under false names, a ghost haunting the hallways. Billy Wilder, the legendary director, supposedly said, "If you must get in trouble, do it at the Chateau Marmont." It was a haven, a hideout, a stage for private dramas. Directors held secret casting sessions. Writers, battling deadlines holed up for weeks. Lovers conducted illicit affairs. The chateau was more than a hotel. It was a confessional, a silent accomplice. It weathered the decades. It saw Hollywood change from the studio system to the independent era. It saw fashions come and go. In the 1950s, it was where James Dean reportedly jumped through a window to audition for Rebel Without a Cause. In the 1960s, it became a haven for the counterculture. Rock stars replaced movie stars. The Doors, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones. Jim Morrison used what he called the eighth of his 9 lives dangling from a balcony. John Bonham, the drummer for Led Zeppelin, famously rode a motorcycle through the lobby. The hotel's elegance became faded, a little frayed around the edges. The grandeur was still there, but now it had a patina of decadence, of glorious ruin. The chateau had a soul. It absorbed the stories, the secrets, the triumphs, and the tragedies of its guests. It was a living entity accumulating ghosts. And in the winter of 1982, a new guest arrived, a man who was himself a glorious ruin, a man looking for a sanctuary, but who would instead find a tomb. His story did not begin in Hollywood. It began in the flat, snowy suburbs of Chicago. John Adam Belushi was born on January 24, 1949, in Wheaton, Illinois. He was the son of Albanian immigrants. Adam, his father, ran a restaurant called the Fair Oaks. Agnes, his mother, was a cashier. They were outsiders, hard-working people chasing the American dream in a conservative, middle-class town. John felt that outsider status acutely. He was a stocky kid. Not handsome in the conventional sense. He was loud. He was restless. He had a desperate, burning need to be noticed, to be loved. In high school, he channeled that energy into acceptable outlets. He was the captain of the football team, a ferocious, all-conference linebacker. He was the drummer in a rock band, the Ravens, pounding the skins with a manic energy that foreshadowed his comedy. He was the homecoming king. He was performing, always performing, creating a character of the popular all-American boy. But underneath, there was a different current, a darker one, a sense of not belonging, a deep-seated insecurity that he was just a fat, funny Albanian kid who had to work twice as hard to be accepted. Comedy was his weapon and his shield. His high school drama teacher saw the spark, a raw, untamed talent. He encouraged John to pursue acting. After a brief, unhappy stint at a local college, Belushi found his tribe. He auditioned for the Second City, Chicago's legendary improvisational theater. This was his university, his training ground. At Second City, his anarchic energy was not just tolerated, it was celebrated. He learned to channel his rage, his sweetness, his vulnerability into characters. He was brilliant, a force of nature on stage, unpredictable, dangerous, and hysterically funny. He had an animal magnetism. Audiences couldn't take their eyes off him. It was here that he met his creative soulmate, a lanky, intellectual Canadian with an encyclopedic knowledge of blues music and paranormal phenomena. Dan Aykroyd. They were a perfect contrast. Aykroyd was the precise, rapid-fire brain. Belushi was the explosive, emotional gut. Together, they were unstoppable. In 1973, Belushi was recruited for the National Lampoon Lemmings show in New York, an off-Broadway rock and roll parody. He stole the show with his devastating impression of Joe Cocker, a spastic, flailing, guttural performance that was both a loving tribute and a merciless satire. It was pure Belushi. New York was the next level. The city matched his energy. It fed his ambition. It was also where the drugs began to take hold. Cocaine was everywhere in the 1970s entertainment world. It was fuel. It was a status symbol. For Belushi, it was a way to keep the performance going long after the curtain fell. In 1975, a Canadian producer named Lorne Michaels was putting together a new late-night comedy show, a show that would change television forever. Saturday Night Live. Belushi was one of the first people he wanted, but Michaels was hesitant. He worried John was too volatile, too undisciplined. A thug comic. John auditioned anyway. He performed a character he had honed at Second City, a samurai warrior working as a deli slicer. He didn't say a word. It was all physical, the intense focus. The delicate yet violent slicing of a salami with a razor-sharp katana. The guttural Japanese-like grunts. It was mesmerizing. And hilarious. He was hired. The original cast of Saturday Night Live, the not ready for primetime players, became the most famous comedy troupe in America, and Belushi was its supernova. He was the samurai. He was the angry news commentator screaming, "But no!" He was one of the Coneheads. He was Beethoven, possessed by the spirit of Ray Charles. And he was one half of a new musical act, born from his and Aykroyd's shared love of rhythm and blues, the Blues Brothers. Dressed in black suits, skinny ties, and dark sunglasses, Joliet, Jake, and Elwood Blues were more than a parody. They were a passionate, authentic tribute to the music they loved. The Golden Age had begun. For a brief, dazzling period in 1978, John Belushi was the king of American comedy. Saturday Night Live was the #1 show on television. The Blues Brothers album, Briefcase Full of Blues, went to #1 on the charts. And a low-budget, anarchic comedy film he had made during the SNL hiatus became a cultural phenomenon, National Lampoon's Animal House. Belushi played John Bluto Blutarski, the id of the movie, a 7-year college student with a 0.0 grade point average, a human black hole of consumption. Bluto was a cartoon, a toga-wearing, food-fighting, beer-guzzling force of chaos. The role made Belushi a movie star, but it also created a monster. The public confused the actor with the character. They wanted him to be Bluto. They would send drinks to his table. They would offer him drugs. They wanted him to smash a guitar, to start a food fight, and a part of him wanted to oblige. The line between John Belushi, the gifted performer, and Bluto, the out-of-control party animal, began to blur. Then it began to disappear. He was living the rock and roll lifestyle he had once parodied. The excess was staggering. He left Saturday Night Live in 1979 along with Aykroyd to focus on a film career. The move to Hollywood was the turning point. In New York, he was part of an ensemble. He had a support system. His wife, Judy, whom he had known since high school, tried to ground him. Friends like Aykroyd tried to manage him. In Hollywood, he was a star, isolated by his fame, surrounded by sycophants and enablers. The pressure was immense. His next film was Steven Spielberg's epic comedy, 1941. It was a huge, expensive production, and it was a flop. Belushi's performance as the Wild Pilot, Captain Wild Bill Kelso, felt like a retread of Bluto. It was chaotic, but lacked the joy. The failure terrified him. He was afraid of being a one-trick pony, the fat, funny guy. He followed it with the Blues Brothers movie, a massive, car-crashing musical extravaganza directed by John Landis. The production was notoriously difficult, largely due to Belushi's escalating drug use. Cocaine was a line item in the movie's budget, a grim reality of getting their star to the set. The movie was a hit, but the process had taken a toll. He tried to stretch as an actor. He made a romantic comedy called Continental Divide. He played a tough Chicago columnist who falls for a reclusive birdwatcher. It was a quiet, sensitive performance. He was proud of it. The film was a commercial disappointment. The message from Hollywood was clear. Give us Bluto. Give us Jake Blues. Don't give us the real John Belushi. This pushed him deeper into despair and deeper into drugs. His next film, Neighbors, reunited him with Dan Aykroyd. It was supposed to be a sure thing, but it was a disaster. The roles were reversed. Aykroyd played the wild man, Belushi the straight-laced suburbanite. It didn't work. The two friends clashed on set. Belushi's behavior was erratic. He was paranoid, unreliable. The drugs were no longer recreational. They were no longer fuel for the party. They were medicine. A desperate attempt to manage his anxiety, his depression, his fear of failure. He was caught in a vicious cycle. He used cocaine to get up, to have the energy to perform, to be John Belushi. He used heroin to come down, to quiet the noise in his head, to sleep. He was losing control. His health was deteriorating. He was bloated, pale, and perpetually exhausted. His weight ballooned. He became obsessed with a new project, a script he was co-writing with his old friend Don Novello, better known as Father Guido Sarducci. It was called Noble Rot. It was a dark, sophisticated comedy about a Napa Valley wine expert who gets entangled with a crime syndicate. For Belushi, this was his ticket out, his chance to prove he was a serious actor, not just a clown. He poured all his remaining energy into it. He championed it to the studios, but Hollywood wasn't interested. They didn't see the money in it. They wanted another Animal House. The rejection was a devastating blow. By late 1981, he was spiraling. He was living in New York, but spending more and more time in Los Angeles, chasing deals that never materialized, nursing his grievances. He had alienated many of his old friends. His marriage to Judy was strained to the breaking point. He hired Bill Wallace, the trainer, to try and get him clean, to force him to exercise, to keep the dealers away. It was an impossible job. In February 1982, Belushi checked into the Chateau Marmont. He didn't stay in the main hotel. He chose Bungalow 3, a private two-bedroom cottage set back from the pool. It offered seclusion, privacy. It became his fortress and his prison. The bungalow was his headquarters for a final frantic descent into oblivion. The last week of his life was a blur of activity and decay. It began on Monday, March 1st. Belushi was in a manic state. He was trying to work on rewrites for Noble Rot. He was also trying to get a new movie off the ground, a gangster comedy called Moon Over Miami. The phone in Bungalow 3 rang constantly. Studio executives, agents, his wife Judy, calling from New York, her voice tight with worry, and the dealers. They came and went at all hours. The discreet staff of the chateau looked the other way. It was part of the service. The bungalow devolved into chaos. Piles of cash sat on the tables. Cassette tapes of new punk bands were scattered everywhere. He was supposed to be the musical supervisor for an upcoming film, another job he was failing at. He wasn't sleeping. He was living on cocaine and junk food. His mood swung violently. One moment he was charming and funny, the old John. The next, he was dark, paranoid, and angry. On that Monday, a woman arrived at the chateau. Her name was Kathy Smith. She was a Canadian backup singer and a veteran of the rock and roll scene. She had a reputation. She was a user and a dealer. She specialized in heroin. Belushi knew her. He had hired her to score for him. She became a fixture in the bungalow, his private nurse of addiction, his companion in the chaos. Bill Wallace, the bodyguard, saw her as the enemy. He tried to get her to leave, but John wanted her there. The binge intensified. Tuesday, March 2nd. Belushi spent the day in a recording studio jamming with friends. He was sloppy, unfocused. His voice was raw. That night, the party moved back to the bungalow. It was a grim, joyless affair. People came and went, hangers-on hoping for a handout or a line of coke. Kathy Smith was there preparing the drugs. She was an expert at administering speedballs, a potent and dangerous injection of cocaine and heroin. The ultimate high and the ultimate low, delivered in a single rush. Wednesday, March 3rd. Belushi was a ghost, pale and sweating. He complained of being cold even in the California warmth. He complained of stomach pains. His body was shutting down. He made phone calls, his voice slurring. He told his agent he was sick. He told his manager he was quitting Hollywood. Dan Aykroyd, working on a script nearby, grew increasingly alarmed. He called the bungalow, but John was incoherent. That evening, two famous friends decided to check on him, Robert De Niro and Robin Williams. They were in town, and they had heard that John was on a bad run. They arrived at Bungalow 3 separately. What they found was a scene of squalor. Belushi was barely conscious, slumped on a sofa. The room was a disaster. Kathy Smith was there, hovering. De Niro was disgusted. He tried to talk to John, but it was useless. He took some of the cocaine that was sitting out on a table and left. Robin Williams arrived later. He was also disturbed by the scene. He stayed for a while, sharing some coke, trying to lighten the mood with a few jokes. But the atmosphere was too dark, too heavy. He later described Belushi as a bombed-out crater. He left, feeling unsettled. The visits from his famous friends did not serve as a wake-up call. They were just brief interludes in the long, final night. Thursday, March 4th, the last day. Belushi was a wreck. He spent most of the day in bed. Bill Wallace tried to get him to eat. He brought him soup. John refused. Wallace begged him to stop, to let him call a doctor. Belushi became enraged. He screamed at Wallace to get out, to leave him alone. Defeated, Wallace left the bungalow in the early evening. He would come back in the morning to try again. He would be too late. Now, Belushi was alone with Kathy Smith. The night descended on the chateau. Inside Bungalow 3, a final ritual was underway. Smith continued to prepare injections, speedballs. Belushi was past the point of euphoria. He was just chasing oblivion, trying to kill the pain, the physical pain in his gut, and the deeper pain in his soul. According to Smith's later account, he was complaining of the cold. He was having trouble breathing. She gave him another injection, and another. Sometime after midnight, he stumbled into the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. He was making a rattling sound as he breathed. A death rattle. Smith said she checked on him. She asked if he was okay. He mumbled something. She tidied up the living room a little. She gathered some of her things. Then she took his car keys. And she left. She left him alone in the dark, in the quiet bungalow, his body finally succumbing to the poison he had craved. She drove away in his Mercedes, leaving the king of comedy to die. The silence that Bill Wallace discovered the next morning was the silence of the end. The news of John Belushi's death at age 33 sent a shockwave through Hollywood and across the country. It was unbelievable. The man who seemed so full of life, so indestructible, was gone. The initial headlines were clinical. Actor John Belushi found dead. The cause of death was listed as acute cocaine and heroin intoxication, an overdose. But the story was not that simple. It was a story of suicide by slow motion, a tragedy that had been playing out in public for years. Hollywood, the town that had made him a star and fed his addiction, now wrung its hands in collective, performative grief. There was a search for blame. The media descended on the Chateau Marmont. The hotel, once a symbol of discreet privacy, was now the center of a lurid public scandal. Bungalow 3 became the most famous hotel room in the world. The investigation quickly focused on the mysterious last woman to see him alive. Kathy Smith. She had fled to Canada. Months later, feeling the pressure, she gave a paid interview to the National Enquirer. Her confession was brazen and chilling. The headline was stark. "I killed John Belushi." She described the final night in detail, the drugs, the injections, the speedballs. She admitted to giving him the final fatal dose. Her confession led to her extradition to the United States. She was charged with second-degree murder. In a plea bargain, she pleaded no contest to involuntary manslaughter and several drug charges. She served a mere 15 months in a California state prison. For many of Belushi's friends and family, it was a shockingly light sentence, a miscarriage of justice. But they knew the truth. Kathy Smith had loaded the gun, but John had been pulling the trigger for years. The aftermath was a long, slow process of mourning. Dan Aykroyd delivered a eulogy at the funeral that was both heartbreaking and defiant. He played a tape of the Ventures' The 2,000-Pound Bee, a raucous instrumental, as the coffin was lowered into the ground, a final act of punk rock rebellion for his fallen friend. Judy Belushi, his widow, would later write a book, Samurai Widow, a painful and honest account of their life together and his struggle with addiction, an attempt to reclaim his story from the tabloid narrative. And what of the Chateau Marmont, the place where the tragedy unfolded? The scandal did not destroy it. It mythologized it. The hotel became infamous, a landmark of dark tourism. Bungalow 3 became its most requested room. Guests wanted to sleep in the bed where he died. They wanted to feel the ghosts. The chateau, which had been in a state of genteel decline for years, suddenly had a new, dangerous cachet. It leaned into its reputation as a rock and roll hotel, a place of excess and intrigue. The death of John Belushi cemented its identity for a new generation. It was no longer just the home of old Hollywood glamour. It was a place where beautiful, talented people came to burn out. In 1990, the hotel was purchased by the hotelier André Balaz. He understood the chateau's power. He knew its history, both the light and the dark, was its greatest asset. He undertook a meticulous restoration. He polished the faded glamour. He brought back the sense of exclusive luxury. But he didn't erase the ghosts. He curated them. The Chateau Marmont today is more successful than ever. A playground for A-list celebrities who want privacy and a touch of vintage cool. It is a beautiful, expensive, and impeccably run hotel. But the shadows remain. Every corner holds a story. Every room has a secret. And Bungalow 3 stands as a quiet, permanent memorial, a monument to a singular talent and a devastating loss. The story of John Belushi and the Chateau Marmont is more than a simple celebrity tragedy. It is a cautionary tale about the cost of fame, about the corrosive nature of addiction. It is about the impossible pressure to always be on, to always be the life of the party, even when your soul is dying. Belushi was a man of immense appetites, an appetite for food, for laughter, for love, for success, and for drugs. He wanted to be a serious actor, but he was trapped inside the persona of a cartoon. He was a deeply sensitive man who used a shield of anarchic comedy to protect himself. In the end, the shield wasn't strong enough. The Chateau Marmont was the perfect final setting for his story, a place built as a fantasy castle, a fortress of dreams. It promised sanctuary, but offered only a beautifully furnished stage for self-destruction. Its thick walls, designed to keep the world out, also served to lock the demons in. It was a silent accomplice, its discretion a form of neglect. Who killed John Belushi? Was it Kathy Smith, the enabler who administered the poison? Was it Hollywood, the system that demanded he be Bluto and rejected the artist he wanted to be? Was it the Chateau Marmont, the beautiful prison that provided the privacy for his final binge? Or was it John himself, a man who flew too close to the sun, burning with a fire that was too bright to last? The answer is all of them, and none of them. Legacy is a complicated thing. John Belushi is not remembered for noble rot. He is remembered for the food fight, for the samurai sword, for the black suit and sunglasses. He is remembered for the laughter. A wild, convulsive, liberating laughter that blew the doors off a generation. And he is remembered for his death. For the sordid, lonely end in a hotel bungalow, the two legacies are forever intertwined. The brilliant success and the spectacular flameout. The house endures. The Chateau Marmont stands on its hill, a silent witness. It has absorbed this story as it has absorbed so many others. It has made it part of its mystique, part of its brand. The dream of Hollywood has a price. Every mansion has its shadows. And if you stand outside the chateau on a quiet night, you can almost feel it. The lingering energy of all the lives lived and lost within its walls. You can almost hear the echo of a wild, desperate laugh carried on the cool night air. A ghost in the garden of good and evil. A reminder of the man who made the world laugh and who paid for it with his life. A palace spread across the hill, a fortress of solitude. And in one of its quietest corners, a tragedy that will never be forgotten. The sun rises over the Hollywood Hills. Another perfect day. But the shadows in Bungalow 3 are long, and they are permanent.